Hi guys, thanks for listening to part 34 of the Irrational series. Full series playlist is linked below in the description. You saw it on the news. All Might was retiring. His secret was out in the open. A weak city for the taking, no symbol of peace to protect it. All for One was the go big or go home type person, you decided. No more surprise attacks. He was going all out. 3 days before the scheduled destruction of the world, he sent Shigaraki to announce it. Shigaraki demolished the city's legislative building and planted a banner in the rubble. The words on the banner were the same words that All for One spoke over every TV station as Dr. Garaki hacked into the network. The demolition and rebuilding of the world will begin on the 3rd morning from today. He smiled on the staticky screen as citizens everywhere looked on in fear. Heroes, your final stand will be at the ruins of your government building. If you want to die first, be there. But if you have the will to keep living, there is a place for you in the new world. You were surprised when the first heroes showed up, less than 8 hours after the announcement. Heroes joining the villains. They nodded to you respectfully, as though you were some sort of symbol to them, the first to defect. You nodded back, expression stony. More and more came. All for One's army was growing. Heroes who didn't feel confident beating All for One. Heroes who had only fought with the immense strength of All Might at their backs. Cowards. You didn't hate them as much as you should. Hadn't you run your mouth? Blabbered any words that came to mind when All for One had been about to kill you? You understood what it felt like to act out of fear. But you were angry. Every hero coming to the villain's side was one more person Aizawa would have to fight. It felt like your presence was the catalyst to the incoming tide of traitors. And that frustrated you. You were here to protect Aizawa, not to build an army against him. As the numbers grew, you almost hoped he wouldn't show up. That for once in his life, he would sit a fight out. But you knew him better than that. No matter how outmatched, outnumbered, he'd be there. All you could do was wait. You stood on the rooftop, gazing out at a peaceful city one last time as dawn slowly approached. Even at this early hour, traffic jammed the streets. The last of the city residents evacuating. Cars packed to capacity. Light gleamed off of their metal roofs as each speck of a vehicle trickled out to safety, turning the roads into shining strands of gold. The city would be empty. Already, the dark windows made buildings look abandoned, as though those shining gold roadways were the literal light leaking away from everything. You turned your back on it and headed down to the meeting. You'd given up on braiding your hair ages ago, allowing it to do its messy, wavy thing. You hadn't had a proper shower in ages. Your hero costume had gotten torn from all the intense physical training, the loose, ragged cuffs of your pants fluttering with each step. Your hand wraps had stains on them, some of them from the time you'd made Shigaraki's nose bleed. Yes, you looked different. But your outwardly wild appearance only showed a fraction of how wild you'd grown on the inside. Today was the day it would all be put to the test. You'd changed enough to convince All for One. But had you stayed the same in your heart? You pushed open the doors of the meeting and were surprised to only see one person, All for One. He was smiling. Apprentice, this is my final training. Power engulfed you, tingled through your skin, shone through every bit of you. It raged within you, begging to be set free. All for One looked older now, more tired, more peaceful. Do you feel that? He asked. You nodded. This power, trying to get out. My final lesson is, let it out. Pitch black fluid swirled around you, teleporting you to a waiting army. As soon as the two of you appeared, the villains let out a reverberating cheer. All for One met your gaze for a moment. This is your army, he seemed to say. Your heart raced. This power, you couldn't contain it. All for One nodded. You raised your fist, allowing power to explode outwards into the air, crackling red light. The cheers grew deafening. Say something, All for One murmured. The power within you amplified your voice as you gave your first ever public speech, and you felt sick. Let's end this, you shouted. The only thing you'd been able to think of that wasn't a lie. Short and sweet. The army roared approval. Swirling darkness gave way to the scene they had all been anticipating. Down at the base of the pile of rubble, the heroes waited. Hundreds of them. Every face showed resolve, showed that they didn't expect to walk away from this. A chaotic crowd, but strategically placed upon closer inspection. Those with long-distance quirks at the back, strongly built heteromorphs at the front. So why? Why was Aizawa, with no combat quirk and a long-distance ability, at the front? Was he being punished? Because of you? Mike stood next to him, sunglasses gleaming, the stubborn friend he was. Night Eye stood on his other side, gazing at you grimly, seeing this scene for the second time. It hurt to see Aizawa's expression. No fear, just concern. And hope. His eyes never left you. An army stood behind you, thousands of fast breathing patterns and heartbeats in your sensitive ears, ready to strike, waiting for you to lead them. Go on, All for One murmured. The power raged within you, a storm too big to contain within your small frame and glowing skin. You let out a shout of pure adrenaline, the army of villains picking up the sound and amplifying it 1,000-fold. The heroes let out their own defiant shout, their voices echoing richly through the abandoned city. The two forces began to move, the front lines taking steps, the reinforcements jostling against them from behind, starting to gain momentum. You sprinted down the rubble, crackling with power, several yards ahead of the villain army. Everything went as All for One had planned. Until you turned, whirling to face All for One, and let out a crackling bolt of energy directly at him. All for One's point of view. Betrayed. As the bolt of light crackled towards him, his mind focused on odd things. Not the emotional tension in the face of his protege as she stabbed him in the back. Not on the emotions he felt himself at what was happening. No. His mind focused on the distant figure of the hero over Eiko's shoulder. Eraserhead. It all came together with crystalline clarity in that moment. Eraserhead had done this. Eraserhead had stolen his apprentice. Quick as thought, inky shadow swirled him in and out of space. He reappeared behind Eraserhead with his arm encircling the hero's neck, then vanished, taking the hero with him. Present Mike's point of view. He barely had time to take a breath before All for One and Aizawa vanished. He took a step towards the empty space where his friend had been standing, a delayed reaction, then took gasping, panicked breaths as he reevaluated. The villain army was in chaos. Eiko's blast of energy had demolished the center of their ranks when All for One had teleported out of its path. Villains milled about, not sure whether to attack, afraid of Eiko's power. A furious Tomura Shigaraki rallied them, bringing some order to their ranks, but the damage was done. By the time they regrouped, the heroes were bringing them down. Despite Mike's determination to finally be there for Aizawa, Aizawa was on his own. But Mike's gaze fixed on you, fighting alone in the middle of the villain army. He knew what Aizawa would want. He kept his eyes on you as his strides turned to a run. Villains began to turn towards him. Just a little longer. He waited until the last possible moment, until he was nearly to the edge of their forces, before letting out an air-shattering yell. They dropped like dominoes, clutching their heads. He sprinted through the path he'd created. Eiko was holding her own pretty well. When had she gotten this strong? Her new quirk seemed pretty useful. She could easily toss entire groups flying into the air with crackling bolts of power. and her speed was incredible. If not for the slight blurs, it almost looked like she was teleporting. She was holding back, Mike could tell. Not using her claws, not actually ending lives, just incapacitating. Even with that limitation, she was winning. Even against an army, she was winning, glowing with power. "Hey, kid," Mike greeted, finally reaching you. "Whatever vitamins you've been taking, I think I need some too." You glanced at him over your shoulder, eyes sparkling in surprise. "Uncle Mike, You hesitated, kicking a villain in the face. "I never meant to join the villains, you know." "We can catch up later, kid," Mike panted. He was having a bit more difficulty than you. You noticed and sent his attackers exploding away with the flick of your wrist. "I came to help you," Mike muttered. "Seems a bit ironic now." You laughed. In less than 15 minutes, the battle was over. The heroes won. You couldn't believe it. You stared down at the aftermath, the exhausted crowds and bandages and mass arrests that were taking place. Only one thing was missing. Dad. You scanned the crowd. Where was he? Wait, weren't a lot of the villains missing? Where was Katsumi? Where was All for One? Unease prickled at you. Mike started down the hill of rubble, going to search, but you stayed high up, using your keen eyesight to scan the crowds. "Missed me, apprentice?" You whirled. An icy pain lanced through your shoulder, draining the storm of power within you. You fell to your knees, gasping as you tried to stop the bleeding with your hand. "How does it feel to be stabbed in the back?" All for One asked with deceptive calm, as the ribbon of shadow and glowing red wire retracted back to him. You fell over, curled around your wound. To suddenly have everything taken from you. All for One tossed a pair of yellow goggles onto the rubble next to you. They skittered before settling between two broken chunks of concrete. You stared uncomprehendingly at their bright yellow color. "Those are... where is... Eraserhead," All for One hissed, "is dead. At the bottom of the sea." "No. Impossible." All for One crouched next to you, studying your horror-struck expression. "To think that you managed to fool me," he murmured, "when you were this loyal to the heroes. I was too soft. I was a fool." You glimpsed a spark of pain in his eyes, but the blaze of hatred engulfed it. He closed his blazing eyes with a sigh, then breathed in deeply. "These powers only have one purpose. I had hoped to conserve my strength for the rebuilding that was to follow, but..." Power began crackling around him, the rubble fragments vibrating and levitating from the sheer charge of energy around him. "I'll settle for a stereotypical world domination with the stereotypical power struggle. I hope you remember, apprentice, that the violence you are about to witness would not have been necessary if you'd executed my plan. But now..." He levitated upwards into the shining, supercharged air. "Now I'll need to go even further to achieve an unquestionable victory." The shouts of heroes grew as All for One began levitating more and more of the surroundings. "Why?" you shouted. "Why did you want me, if you could just do it yourself?" He hesitated in the middle of his crackling power, his hatred glowing eyes slowly finding yours. "Because I wanted to be there to build the new world. But now..." The power roared around him. "Now I cannot." Your eyes widened at the implications of his words. "This doesn't have to be it. There's another way. Rebuilding the world. It doesn't have to be done all at once." "You're naive, Eiko," All for One murmured. "Just like my brother. And just like with him, I was foolish enough to care." His expression twisted in bitterness. He let out a roar of pure frustration, and every building within a block cracked into uneven chunks, levitating skyward. The heroes were fighting, but it was like a cloud of gnats, insignificant, easily swatted aside. You'd felt the storm within you. Now you saw what would have happened if you'd truly let it out. You were caught up in it, caught up in the rubble floating skyward. Drops of blood seeped through your hand, covering your shoulder. Your hair whipped around. Rocks flew past you, cutting your cheek. The yellow flash of Aizawa's goggles spun through the air. Lightning bolts of crackling energy struck randomly through the storm of All for One's destruction. Amid all the chaos, you heard a familiar voice. "Cat ears!" And there he was, blasting through the air, skillfully dodging rubble. Bakugo. The relief on his face as he caught hold of your hand made you remember him reaching for you as he vanished into the portal, only to grab empty mist. But this time, when he reached for you, he caught you. His arms wrapped around you, shielding you from the flying debris. Why was he here? No students had been among the heroes. You gripped his shirt dizzily. "Hang on, cat ears," Bakugo growled. "You're a fighter." "I know," you snapped. Bakugo flashed you a bright, smirking grin. It was unexpectedly cute, a ray of sunshine in the storm. He had a rope around his ankle, tethering him to the ground. Someone was pulling both of you back to safety. Wait, that wasn't a rope. That was a capture weapon. The shock of indigo hair whipping in the wind confirmed it. Shinso grabbed you in a tight embrace the moment you and Bakugo touched the ground, chest heaving with emotion. It registered in your dizzy mind that the impossible had happened. Shinso and Bakugo were working together. "Let's get out of here," Bakugo hissed, scooping you up. "We need to leave the city, find a hospital, soon." Shinso wrapped a few loops of his capture weapon around your shoulder and torso in a tight bandage. "Good?" You nodded. He held the extra part taut, and you obligingly extended your claws and slashed it off so that Shinso could still use the rest of his capture weapon. You weren't sure if it was the blood loss or the sinking realization as you replayed the past 20 minutes in your mind, but you were starting to feel like this was all a dream. You stopped paying attention to what happened around you. Aizawa. The memory of his scratched and scuffed yellow goggles tossed onto the shattered concrete, sharp in your mind. Tears blurred your vision. You remembered the first time you'd seen him on that wall at sunset. The moment was still clear in your mind. The golden light reflecting off of metal trash cans, his relaxed slouch as he sat on the wall. The moment his tired dark eyes met yours for the first time as he turned to glance at you. You could still see it, memory after memory. Setting a bowl of cat food in front of you, the surprise on his expression when you said, "My dad named me." His gentleness when brushing your hair and securing it with elastics. His protective arms holding you after a nightmare. His tired glower across the table as he reminded, "Chew with your mouth closed, Eiko." His hand on your shoulder, dark eyes intent as he explained, "You don't have to hide your quirk." His gruff, "I'm proud of you," when you tried your hardest. His blazing eyes when anyone tried to hurt you. His good advice, his annoying habit of always being right. His hand on your shoulder, never leaving you. Never leaving you? You were, you muttered, choking on tears, the most irrational person ever to live. Because you put everything, absolutely everything, into healing me when I was broken beyond repair. And I don't even get to thank you. Pain and grief spread through your mind like an anesthetic as you faded into unconsciousness. Aizawa's point of view, 20 minutes earlier. There was no time to react. One moment he was watching you do what he'd known you would always do as you turned and used your power for the heroes. The next instant, All for One grabbed him in a chokehold and teleported him. Aizawa couldn't move. Some kind of quirk was paralyzing him. So he was helpless to resist as All for One smashed his face into a wall, and then a car window, and then another wall. Each shattered upon impact, but teleportation made it as quick as thought to find new things to smash Aizawa's face into. Typical. Villains always went for his face. All for One stopped teleporting, holding him up by his collar. He pulled the yellow goggles off over Aizawa's head and inspected them closely. Sturdy, but an eyesore with that yellow color. Well, you won't be needing these anymore. His fingers closed around the goggles, enveloping them except for a bit of the loose band. These will be a nice memento for Eiko to remember you by, in her final moments. Aizawa glared at All For One with gritted teeth as he tried to stay conscious. How did you do it? All For One mused. I groomed her, prepared her for her entire life. And somehow, you came along and overrode all of my influence. What are your methods? Aizawa's eyes narrowed into slits as pain fogged his brain. Never mind. All For One looked at him dismissively. Time for you to die. Still holding his collar, he teleported again. Pressure immediately squeezed Aizawa on all sides. He wanted to gasp, but the feel of cold water warned him to hold his breath. It was dark. Only the faintest glimmers from a surface hundreds of meters away. A shimmer around All For One kept him dry, as he watched Aizawa flail in the depths of the ocean, watched his eyes close as he succumbed to the pressure. Satisfied, he teleported away. Aizawa's body drifted, floated. Through half-open eyes, he could see the faint light of the surface, but he knew it was too far to swim. His ears screamed from the pressure. His air-starved lungs demanded, with increasing urgency, that he take a breath. But as soon as he did, he would be gone, leaving Problem Child on her own. Shirakumo! His underwater shout was unnaturally dampened, almost silent, as air bubbles drifted up from his lips. He inhaled water. Darkness swirled at the edges of his vision, swirling in misty particles. Or was that the swirling of a portal? I can now say with certainty that there will be 36 chapters to this story, although I might add some bonus chapters down the road. Thank you so much for making it this far. Special thanks to all of you who like, comment, and share my videos, as well as those who support me through channel memberships. I hope you all have a great day and a great week. I'll see you later.